Well, I'm Pastor George, and this is another episode of the Presbyterian and Reformed Churchman. I have a return guest, Ruling Elder Brad Isbell of Covenant Presbyterian Church in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And Brad is a Machen-o-phile. Is that a word, Machen-o-phile?
It is now.
It is now. We're talking about Christianity and liberalism. It's the 100th anniversary of J. Gresham Machen's very famous work, Christianity and Liberalism. On the last episode, I read Fosdick's sermon, Shall the Fundamentalists Win? And really kind of just highlighted what I thought was applicable to today. And as we get into this discussion, that's what we want to talk about. We want to see where are the similarities between the fundamentalist modernist controversy of 100 years ago and the I don't know if we're fundamentalists, Brad, but the postmodernist controversy of today. Do you take umbrage at the word fundamentalist describing you, Brad?
Well, if you mean in the sense of a Baptist with an ill-fitting suit and some slobber coming out of his mouth and foam, yes. But if it just means conservative, Bible-believing Christian, I think I'm okay with it. Machen would have said the same, although he didn't really consider himself a fundamentalist, but he certainly felt an affinity with them. But he was sort of, I think maybe Daryl Hart once called him a highbrow fundamentalist. The most sophisticated, the most learned, the most urbane of all the fundamentalists.
Oh, okay. Now, what about John Frame's characterization of us as Machen's warrior children?
Well, I think that was a very unfortunate but telling essay that he wrote a good long time ago, probably 20 years or more. We've talked about that on the Presbycast before. But yeah, that's it's instructive. Everyone should read that. Look that up. Yeah. And Machen's warrior children. And he says that, we were with, and I think he's talking more about OPC people, but of course a lot of PCA people have picked up the ethos that we were sort of born fighting and we're still fighting and we only know how to fight. And I don't think that's true. But no, I don't. I'll say this: what attracted me to Machen when I was new to Presbyterianism, new to the PCA, was that he did provide a model or a reminder that there are things worth fighting for. That's right there at the beginning of the book we're going to talk about tonight, that the things that are unimportant people often agree on. The things that are really important, to quote Machen, are the things about which men will fight. And it's worth fighting for. I can imagine being in some churches and I'm thinking, I don't know if this is worth fighting for, but what we have is, because it's biblical and reformed confessional doctrine, the wonderful ecclesiology, the history that we have, all those things are worth fighting for. Although we don't want to fight just because, we like to fight, and I don't like to fight. I don't like to fight.
No doubt. And so this is the 50th anniversary of the PCA we'll be celebrating, and it's the 100th anniversary of this book we're talking about. And I do think the PCA is worth fighting for. It's one of the reasons I started this podcast for ruling elders, because, and again, really, I've had you on this show before. I kind of introduced guests to you, but I don't really think so. I think anybody listening to this already listens to Presbycast, but you're the host of Presbycast and really just have encouraged me over the years to have my ruling elders involved. And I provide this platform. So as we have this discussion, I kind of want to assume that maybe people have heard of Machen, but they're not really familiar with maybe the debates that were going on 100 years ago. And maybe they're not even familiar with this book, Christianity and Liberalism, although it's been promoted pretty heavily by the GRN, of which I'm a part, and you're a supporter. And so let's just dig right into this. What was going on when Machen wrote this in 1923, and had been going on for a few decades at that point, really?
Well, let me give you a little bio backup on Machen. I think he was born in 1886 or 7. and his mother was Southern Presbyterian from Macon, Georgia. She'd actually, witnessed some of the parts of the Civil War as the Union Army came through Macon. You can still go and stay in the family home. I think it's called the 18-something Inn in Macon, Georgia. Harry Reeder stayed down there. Daryl Hart's been there. I visited it after the 18 General Assembly in Atlanta. Driving on the way home, I just, stopped by and took some pictures, made some video. I've never stayed there. But his heritage was Southern Presbyterian. He grew up in Baltimore, and his family, and I can't remember the name of the church, but they were a member of a Southern church. There were Southern and Northern churches in Baltimore. So his heritage is Southern Presbyterian, but he ended up at Princeton Theological Seminary after having gone to Johns Hopkins in languages and being a student. Then at Princeton Theological Seminary, which was it was the flagship seminary of the PCUSA, but it was also the most conservative and confessional of all the seminaries. So that put them in an interesting position in the early 20th century. About the time Machen was born, in the 1880s, you could see clear signs of liberalization and openness to some of the higher critical thinking. There was a famous heresy trial for, I think it was Augustus Briggs. You can look up the Briggs trial in the 1880s. And I don't even remember exactly how that turned out, but that's just to say that nothing comes out of nowhere. This has been developing in the Northern Church for a while, since the late 19th century. And, I've done some research. I'm interested in, elders and deacons and officers and things like that. And the evangelical impulse of the Northern Church led them to receive in 1905, 1906, most of the Cumberland Presbyterian Church. Now, we're in an interesting time. We've got the alleged revival up in Kentucky at Asbury College and at several colleges across the country. Well, not too far from that, on the other side of Lexington, is really where the Second Great Awakening sort of kicked off in the South. Cane Ridge, the Cane Ridge Revival. Out of Cane Ridge came the Church of Christ, the Campbellites, and all the branches that came off of that, but also the Cumberland Presbyterian Church, which, they chafed at the requirements for an ordained ministry, an educated ministry, seminary training, because that was a hindrance to them on the frontier. They couldn't grow as quickly. They couldn't commission ministers and get them on the field. So they were sort of a 4-point Calvinistic. Of course, they didn't like definite atonement very well. They had female officers very quickly, and this was like in 1805. So it was in the first 2 decades of the 19th century when the Cumberlands started. But they pretty quickly had female officers, probably even female exhorters. There were a lot of female preachers back in even in the early 1800s in that revival movement. So the Cumberland Presbyterian Church was received, most of it was received back into the Northern Church in 1905, 1906. So the Northern Church had this desire to grow, to reabsorb these barely Calvinistic Presbyterians. They actually changed the confession for them. They softened the confession. They put a chapter in on the love of God, and they kind of put some qualifiers on, elect infants and maybe the importance of, just very evangelical changes to the Westminster Confession of Faith. I mean, they added a couple of chapters even, and that was all done in the service. Atonement? I think maybe I was looking at that today. I think maybe they softened definite atonement even a little bit.
I think limited atonement was an issue for them too.
Yeah, and they weren't completely against it, but I think there was some modification there. 2 or 3 chapters added, a couple of things modified. So I say that to say that, and I'm not a church historian, but my opinion is that it's best to view that even the liberalizing Northern Church as an evangelical church. They wanted to grow. They weren't what we would think of as classic revivalist, but they were surely interested in growing and in the city, in contextualization, in appealing to the culture, all those things, and that's evidenced in receiving the Cumberland Presbyterian Church in 1904, 1905. So Machen's in college then. He wasn't really plugged into these changes, but all this stuff had already the wheels towards liberalization were already turning, and that was way back 1905 and 6. And as someone concerned with the deaconess issue, female officers in the PCA, I started thinking, well, what was Machen dealing with? What was going on in the Northern Church? Well, the Cumberland Church already had female elders and deacons, at least deacons, I think elders too. And so really the PCUSA, they bought female deacons when they bought the Cumberland Presbyterian Church. And that happened in around 1910 or so. Sometime before 1922 they had those. So Machen was a member of a church with female officers. And you just don't see him writing about that or talking about it. It was already a done deal before he became active around 1920 in the Northern Church. And given the scale of the other problems they have, he just wasn't all that worried about it, I think. But the best evidence of how he actually felt about it was that the OPC, formed in 36, with him at the head, didn't have female officers of any kind.
Right, that's a great point for just people listening, because we fight battles on various fronts and we have to pick our battles, and it'd be easy to walk in a church and think a church is supportive, or the leadership of a church is supportive of things you may be witnessing in the church, but they may be fighting battles in all different levels. And so that's very interesting about Machen. I didn't know that.
Yeah, the point is not to let it get there. You don't want the doctrinal situation of your church to be so bad that ecclesiology is suddenly not very important. So some people say that we in the PCA, you're too worried about these things. Well, no, we're worried about those things because we're worried about what comes after them and what they portend and what that, the view of Scripture that will allow things like that will eventually allow other problems. And I don't want to fight the same battles that Machen fought.
No, and if we don't take care of the little stuff, that's a sure sign that we're not going to deal with the big stuff.
Yeah. So Machen, he was sort of a spoiled rich kid in a way. His family had money. His dad was a lawyer. And there was some family money, and there'd been a lot of legal heritage in his family. I think one of his great-grandfathers was like a clerk to the U.S. Senate. I think they had somebody that worked at the Library of Congress. I mean, they were establishment moneyed people. So he had the option of, taking about 10 years to figure out what he was going to do. He would take language classes, and he thought he was going to teach Greek, and he was a high-level Greek scholar, even in the secular sense. But eventually, he didn't know if he ever wanted to be ordained in the Presbyterian Church. I think he didn't. I think he wasn't sure of his profession, and I think there were some things. He was a high-level intellect. He had some of the intellectual struggles that intellectuals have with Christianity today. So around 1910, I think. 12, maybe a year or two off, he went to Germany to study, as many religious Protestant religious scholars did. He went to Tübingen and Göttingen. Those were really the seedbed of. That's where they invented Protestant liberalism, and that's where and he was there off and on for a couple of years, and he had a crisis of faith. He struggled with the claims of liberalism, He was shocked when he got there that these professors they seemed to be Christian because they were very pious and they had all these experiences, and he was tempted. There are letters with his mother back and forth that kind of go through this. We learn that his mother was praying for him all the time. She was very doctrinally sophisticated. She knew what was going on, and but it's a puzzling thing that even conservative Protestants kept sending their best and brightest to Germany in the late 1800s and all through the 20th century, and lost them to liberalism and the critical what do they call it? The higher criticism of Scripture, which meant that they only believed a small part of it, and it really became, for those liberals in Germany, all about experience. It was about all they had left. Some of them had a heritage of Lutheran pietism, which arguably is kind of like the revivalism of Europe, Northern Europe. But Machen was nearly swayed, but he got through that. He came back home, and after a year or two of teaching at Princeton, he finally decided that he would seek ordination in the Northern Presbyterian Church. Though he was a Southern Presbyterian, Princeton was the seminary of the Northern Presbyterian Church. And then World War I happened. I think he was a little too old to serve. He also didn't think a minister should carry a gun. He considered the ambulance corps, but he found out that they had to do a little shooting sometimes too, so he volunteered for the YMCA, which was not an exercise club back then. It was actually kind of pardon the expression, a Christian nationalist civic organization. And the U.S. government, they were so ill prepared for World War I. We had a tiny army when World War I started. They basically couldn't handle a lot of the logistics and commissary stuff and mailing of letters and all these sorts of things that a chaplain might do. So they let the YMCA take it over. So he volunteered as a YMCA, I forget, not a chaplain, I forget the name that they assigned to this sort of work that he did. Most of what he did was make hot chocolate and sell stamps to French soldiers. He had some language, and he was very near the front, got nearly blown up a time or two. But he finally, at the end of the war, got to preach a little bit. And that was some of the first preaching he did, was to soldiers of various kinds in Paris and in the area after the hostilities had ended. But he didn't do any preaching or real chaplain work during the war. He served very humbly there. And he came back he got back in maybe sometime in 1919 and threw himself fully into the ministry of the Northern Church. He was never a pastor. He had some interim pastorates at the fairly significant church there in Princeton, but he was never a local church pastor. He was always kind of an itinerant preacher and writer and seminary professor, and later seminary founder and president. But I don't know. When I use this word, it's going to sound like a different kind of fundamentalist. Everybody has their radicalization moment. For me, it was the 2010 General Assembly and the strategic plan. You can go look that up if you don't know about it. It pretty much told us everything that was going to happen in the PCA for the past 13 years, and it involved an early draft of that strategic plan. So maybe we could leave NAPARC and partner with denominations, and you could tell they meant the EPC, people that we have more in common with, that we share missional priorities with. Well, as a fairly new Presbyterian, that sent me right through the roof. I mean, I thought, okay, I didn't sign up to become a squishy evangelical Presbyterian. That's not what we needed. I came from evangelicalism. I didn't want any more of that. But Machen was a delegate to the 1920 General Assembly of the Northern Church. And the issue there, of course, he's on the faculty of the seminary by this time at Princeton. You can imagine what the seminary lounge, faculty lounge conversations were like. He's hanging out, he's working with Warfield and the young, the last Hodge and those guys. So, they knew what was up. And
I love the picture of them, by the way.
Oh, yeah. But
They
what was
so
up?
bothered by having to take that picture.
Yeah, he hated, yes, he didn't like to have his picture made. But what was up was the plan of organic union. There was a plan to make a Protestant superdenomination. Again, we talk about Christian nationalism. Mainline Protestantism ran the country back then. All of our politicians, most, our bankers, the tycoons, they were all Rockefeller. Okay, does that ring a bell? He was a Protestant liberal, mainline Protestant liberal, and they ran the country. So this idea of one super denomination of all, the Episcopal Church, the American Baptist Church, the Methodist Church, the congregational churches, all these things coming together for one super denomination. Well, it never happened, but it was being considered in 1920, and Machen, thankfully and predictably was against that. He saw that that was going to dilute what little doctrine that they, were holding on to. So that was his radicalization moment. So really, he hadn't had a lot of denominational involvement prior to 1920. So he went from, in my perception, he certainly didn't during the war, 1918, 19, he wasn't thinking about these things. He comes back to the U.S. and immediately plunges in. So that's 1920. He's given the lectures that led to this book, Christianity and Liberalism, in 1921. He's writing the journal articles that became this book in 22, and in February 23, we're in the month. Exactly 100 years ago, this book came out. So I don't think I've ever read anyone who talked about how quickly he became just very active and very plugged in and radical after a fashion. When he jumped into the Presbyterian ministry, he jumped in with both feet. And,
what church and what state was he in at the time? Well, he wasn't at a church, so where's Princeton?
Well, he probably attended First Presbyterian of Princeton, New Jersey, yeah.
Right.
But he would preach. He would go to if he wasn't preaching, he would often go to New York City, and he would hear all kinds of preachers. I mean, he heard Fosdick many times before Fosdick ever preached that sermon, which you alluded to earlier, but he traveled a lot. And so he was a member of the Presbytery of New Brunswick, which is what encompasses that area.
Right. So did he and Fosdick ever, that you know of, have interaction, debate, discussion, or was it all just, or do people just use these two works, even though Fosdick's was a sermon and Machen's became a book, they just use these works as the symbolic poles of the debate?
It was all in print. I mean, Machen was highly respected, but, he would go, if you read his letters, he would quietly go and slip into a church in New York and just listen. Henry Sloane Coffin, he was a liberal Presbyterian. He would hear him preach, and Machen would comment on these things and write letters to his family and talk about them. But yeah, he traveled a lot. He was all over. He had some stints of teaching Sunday school or being an interim pastor there. But he quickly made enemies. There were some liberals at that church, powerful guys who kind of did him in. A former pastor, Henry Van Dyke, he kind of had it in for Machen at some point. And people would write letters to the editor. I mean, there were people who, when some of these guys decided they didn't like Machen, they would basically hold a press conference, and the New York Times would cover the goings-on at Princeton Seminary. It's not like today. I mean, it really was national news when the Presbyterian Church had a fight.
Right. And so the fundamentalists become known as the fundamentalists because of the 5 fundamentals, which I explained last.
Well, and it was a series of books. There were actually more than 5. But yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But those 5 became the symbol of it.
Right. And the Presbyterian Church also had their own 5 points. They weren't the 5 points of Calvinism or the 5 fundamentals, but it was 5 essential doctrines. And that's another thing. It's a huge warning sign when a denomination says, well, we've got this confession, that's important, but here's what we really believe. Here are the 5 things we can't do without. Or here are the 5 things you've got to swear allegiance to. You've already lost the battle at that point.
You've lost the battle.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's
I discussed that last time. Like, it sends the signal that other things are not as important, or we can differ on these other things. It always amazes me how we have this confession that is so clear on so many things, and then we want to re-clarify what's already clear. Yeah. So this book, how did the book Christianity and Liberalism, what was its genesis? So you gave us the background and the setting.
Well, here's my 1924 second edition.
Oh, nice.
Of the book. There are actually a lot of first editions floating around, and they're not terribly expensive. So you can find one on eBay or somewhere on one of those book sites if you want it. But this is a beautiful one. It's well printed. It's a nice size. Good. It's not a. You see, it's a thin book,
right?
And the print's not that small, so it's very, very accessible. But it's also free online. You don't have to ever spend any money to read Christianity and Liberalism. Very easy to find. So the preface gives the genesis of the book. In November of 21. Machen delivered some addresses, an address, probably a long one, to the Ruling Elder Association, which we don't really have those anymore. But when you think about how ubiquitous Presbyterians were in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, that part of the world, the presbytery up there, and it was the Chester Presbytery, not the one he was in, Chester Presbytery, Ruling Elders Association, asked him to come speak on the conflict in the church, what was going on. And the address was given at Wayne Presbyterian Church in Wayne, Pennsylvania, which is sort of a suburb of Philadelphia. Our friend Zach Groff said he used to drive by that church every day on the way to a job that he had when he lived. He's from that area. Of course, it's a PCUSA church now. They went liberal, but at the time they were conservative. Now that's a huge warning for us, that you can know better, and you can have orthodox officers, but if you let it happen, and then of course they also had their property tied up in the Northern Church, just like the Southern Church had. You couldn't leave with your property. So people chose to keep their buildings and lose their faith, essentially. But that was an Orthodox area, Orthodox church at that time. And these ruling elders said, come talk to us about it. He had been, writing articles and letters to the editor and speaking, and he quickly became known as a spokesman for the confessional conservative side. So he gave an address, and it was well received. And then the editor of the Princeton Theological Review asked that he turn it into an article or two, which was called Liberalism or Christianity. Now, I found the original on this. It's weird. It has one title in the table of contents and another on the article. So it's like they reversed the words or something. I should have looked that up. But you can find that online too. The Princeton Theological Review in 1922. So that was Liberalism or Christianity, and then that became the book that we have. And a pastor that he knew, Paul Martin, kind of suggested the concept and the division and the chapters, but Machen filled in the blanks. So people they recognized him as a leader, as an intellect, as a powerful speaker, and he was sort of drafted into this work of fighting liberalism in the Northern Presbyterian Church, and by extension, in all of mainline Protestantism.
Is it safe to say, as we look back 100 years, that liberalism won? Again, Northern Church, New England, like everywhere you go. I have a lot of family in upstate New York, and I'm always shocked as a Presbyterian. A number of quote unquote churches have the word reformed on them, and yet they're not reformed in the sense that we understand reformed. So would you say that in the Northeast, liberalism won?
Well, it won. It won the whole nation over in the Northern Presbyterian Church. They didn't discipline liberals. They did run Machen off. So yes, institutionally, especially, although there were plenty of evangelicals up through the 40s, 50s, maybe. But one of Machen's points was that liberalism was a different religion, and that's a huge part of the book. He makes the case that liberalism was not Christianity. So, in one sense, liberalism didn't win because there was a reaction to it, I guess, in the 40s and 50s, neo-orthodoxy, Bardianism, which is not good, but it's not as bad as classical Christian liberalism, which denied the supernatural, the inspiration of scriptures, the virgin birth, miracles, Christ's atonement, the whole, just a year or two after this book came out, the Auburn Affirmation was published. That was a really brazen denial of a lot of the core tenets of Christianity, or at least a plea for latitude to say that, let's not just talk about the penal substitutionary atonement. That's just one theory of the atonement. And that, inerrancy is just one acceptable theory of how to look at the Bible. Of course, underneath it was pretty much unbelief. But there were over 1,000 ministers signed that. Now, the PCUSA was huge. I mean, it might have had 7,000 or 8,000 ministers nationwide, but a disturbing proportion of the church, or at least the pastors, were completely in the thrall of liberalism. And it won. Churches couldn't.
Because there's hardly any Reformed Presbyterian presence left in the Northeast that I'm aware of. The PCA doesn't have much there. Of course, we're the southern, is the southern version, but even the OPC is small, and so it should be a cautionary tale to us. What was some of the sections or content of the book that you want to highlight?
Well, it's pretty simple. It's 180 pages, something like that. It's got an introduction, which they just call Chapter 1. It's a little confusing. In the introduction, you get a lot of Machen's. You get some of his political philosophy, which he was fairly libertarian. There's an interesting political philosophy in that, and throughout the book. And but he lays it out pretty quickly. He quotes one of his former professors who said he talked about people who like to conduct their battles in a condition of low visibility. In other words, they were I think the word would be pusillanimous. They were not terribly brave. So Machen had teachers who encouraged him to do the right thing and not shrink back. So a famous quote. This is a sort of set the tone. He says the type of this is on the first and second page. The type of religion which rejoices in the pious sound of traditional phrases, regardless of their meanings, or shrinks from controversial matters, will never stand amid the shocks of life. In the sphere of religion, as in other spheres, the things about which men are agreed are apt to be the things that are least worth holding. The really important things are the things about which men will fight. So Machen signaled right off the bat that he wasn't going to pull any punches. Now he was fair, And he admitted that, some liberals were Christians, not that he couldn't judge hearts, but that liberalism was fatal to Orthodox Christianity, and it was, in fact, a different religion because it denied everything that was important. And it's a good time to say that Protestant liberalism, starting in the late 1800s, was not. It didn't have the goal of undermining Christianity. It had the goal of saving it and of appealing to modern men, to modern people. We think about how much the world's changed since the internet, but think about how the world changed between the Civil War and World War I, and that's about 60 years, or less, 50 years. The technological changes, the scientific advancements, theory of evolution, a lot of German intellectual theories that came on. The world was shaken, and then the effect of World War I was just terrible on the psyche of the West. It was an unsettled time, but the liberals' goal was to save Christianity, and I think arguably to contextualize it. It's not analogous to the problems we have in our church today, but maybe the impulse is similar. The impulse to appeal.
Yeah, definitely. And when you highlight exactly what you said from the Civil War to World War I, like we think technology has exploded now, but you're talking about people that didn't have cars one day and then they had them. Like they didn't have electricity in their homes and they had it. And so science was so important. And in that, then there was all this questioning of the supernatural nature of the scriptures. And of course, with that German theology coming in too, there was, what was really important was the spiritual lesson in the text. And maybe that's really what was going on there. So Machen writes, just to highlight some quotes in that introduction, he says, "It may appear that what the liberal theologian has retained after abandoning to the enemy one Christian doctrine after another is not Christianity at all, but a religion which is so entirely different from Christianity as to be long in a distant category." And then later in that section, in trying to remove from Christianity everything that could possibly be objected to in the name of science, and trying to bribe off the enemy by those concessions which the enemy most desires, the apologist has really abandoned what he started out to defend. That's a profound statement, I think.
Yeah, and the reason he mentioned, he hated big government. He hated centralization of power, things that sort of made everyone the same, tried to make everyone the same, he drew the analogy between that and what was happening in the church, because the Northern Church was not a grassroots Presbyterian church. There was a lot of top-down power, and he identified that as modern pragmatism, and being really concerned with results and efficiency and all those things. We run into that today, even in the PCA, with the structure of the assembly and how we try to plow through the business, and committees becoming more powerful. It's a normal impulse. That's what organizations do.
Yeah, yes, that's for sure. You know what struck me about the quote you read? I think I found it. It says, "We shall be interested in showing that despite the liberal use of traditional phraseology, modern liberalism not only is a different religion from Christianity, but belongs in a totally different class of religions." Now, I think that corresponds to what you said. Again, the use of language. And so, and Harry Reeder's famous for saying, they're using our glossary, but not our dictionary. And it's interesting to see that those roots existed 100 years ago. Again, trying to cling to the things that people have found hopeful and important in Christianity, but then redefine what the terms mean. And in doing so, you get this confusion. What do you mean by miracle then? What do you mean by salvation? What do you mean by these things? And so,
And liberalism was very much about experience. They thought experience would hold the church together. We've all had this experience of Jesus, and there was there was some kinship between liberalism and revivalism in a way, where doctrine wasn't that important, but experience was, and that's it was more like what Jesus meant to you, not what the Bible said. But there were people saying, yes, because we've all had this experience, or it's about the spirit of Jesus, meaning the ethos or the example. We know they didn't really like to talk about, Jesus dying for our sins. They like to talk about the idea of Jesus dying or the example. There were even people, and Machen hated this. He just absolutely hated it, and he mentions it maybe in the salvation or the doctrine chapter of the book, that there were people that said, and there were preachers in the teens who said, these guys in France, they were brave enough to go over the top, and you should emulate their sacrifice. And they almost equated the sacrifice of soldiers, which in World War I, I'm sorry, just raising your head was going to get you killed. It was just an insane war. There was nothing noble about the way most people died in World War I, but they would use these soldiers as they were made Christ figures out of them, and they thought they could by example and story, morally urge people into living right or doing better or getting along or having an experience. And Machen hated that. He just hated that crass, vapid use of things like that. And when you lose the truth of Christianity, it's going to get cringy and weird and goofy. I mean, look at the megachurch, look at Joel Osteen, look at Protestant, look at the mainline today, and look at some of the things evangelicals do. When you lose the doctrine or the appreciation for it, nearly anything goes. And there was all kinds of bad doctrine led to bad stuff, and it always does.
Yeah, no doubt. And so, as I read Fosdick's sermon, there was this appeal. I mean, it's definitely this what we would call the social gospel, like this sort of appeal, like let's stop arguing over these little things so that we can not even really reach people for Christ, although I think I saw some of that in Fosdick's sermon, but more like, again, there's a lot of good we need to do in the world, And when he says, like, why are we arguing over these little things? Again, we're talking about the atonement. We're talking about essentially the deity of Christ. I mean, if you deny the virgin birth and you deny his miracles, I mean, you're denying his deity, And but there's more important things.
Right. We're not arguing about those things in the PCA.
That's right.
We're just not. But as I told you earlier, before we came on, there are hints that and a lot of scholars have said it. Penal substitutionary atonement does not sit well with the woke. It doesn't work very well with critical race theory. They don't like that, and some people don't. So we have to be on guard, and for ruling elders. The reason you want to read this book and read your catechism and confession, you want to know what to look for. You want to make sure people hold these doctrines. Everyone who listens to your podcast, George, should be on committees in their presbytery. They need ruling elders on every theological exam or candidates in credential committee, whatever every presbytery seems to call them something different. But you've got to have ruling elders on that committee to meet. They can't even meet without it, to examine candidates for the ministry, transfers, all these things. And if you are concerned about the PCA and you're a ruling elder, get on that committee. You may find you know as much as anyone on there. You're not going to be able to give the Greek exam, but you can ask the hard questions. And if you read Christianity and Liberalism, and you keep up and educate yourself just a little, you're competent to do good work there. So please do that. Everybody who's concerned, there's a way to participate. If you'll show up as a ruling elder, you'll find work to do.
Yeah, it's interesting you're saying that. So that's basically the last chapter of the book, right? I mean, where he's encouraging that kind of involvement. In the first place, they should encourage those who are engaging in intellectual and spiritual struggle. In the second place, Christian officers in the church should perform their duty in deciding upon the qualifications of candidates for the ministry. And I like how he said Christian officers. I mean, he's not limiting that to the ordained pastors. And in the fourth place, I mean, he's going through that in that last chapter as I read it. You know what? As you bring that up, though, what I'm running into with ruling elders at churches that haven't traditionally been involved denominationally but want to be and are encouraged to be, and then they go to presbytery and they go to committee meetings and they're so frustrated at, I don't know it's not gridlock, it's just procedurally how it seems like a kangaroo court sometimes. I mean, we're supposed to be doing things decently in order, and so often what I'm finding is ruling elders are so unimpressed with how I don't. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you have?
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, especially at first. I mean, the learning curve is steep. More in the PCA sponsored a bunch of videos with Dominic Aquila and Fred Greco. You can find those online that are sort of a user's guide to these sort of things, and you can find those. Maybe you can get them and look them up on Vimeo or YouTube, and you can link to that, or maybe have Dom or Fred on. Fred would be happy, or Mel Duncan would be good to give kind of a crash course in ruling elder involvement, because Fred was a ruling elder before he was a pastor. Mel is a ruling elder, and they would be the guys to talk to.
Mel's going to do a bunch.
Yeah, we've tried to do a little bit with more in the PCA to train, but it's really it's a full-time job, and I've been going to Presbytery off and on for 13 years, and I don't know everything by any means, but I'll tell you this: if you show up, you'll probably be respected just because you show up as a ruling elder, and you'll find work to do. They'll put you on a committee.
Well, that's for sure. That's for sure. Their ruling elders are needed on the committees, so they usually are very happy to have them there. I think what you're describing definitely exists. It could be daunting, and when you don't understand it, when you don't know Robert rules, it can be frustrating. But what I'm talking about is more the procedural shenanigans. Like I find ruling elders are giving up work days or Saturdays with their family. They can't adjust their schedule the way a pastor can, and they go to a meeting and they think they're there to do the business of the church. And it seems
like it's already decided.
Yes, like I'll give you an example. So Overture 15 failed. I don't care. I'm going to say this. Overture 15 failed, and so when it failed, our church said, well, we're going to put forward a replacement overture for this, but it wasn't within the 21 days that the presbytery requires it to be in the docket, and that's fine. I'm not complaining about that. I get it. We do things all the time. As a matter of fact, the stuff wasn't emailed out, I don't think, 21 days in advance. But anyway, we had all this other new business, and our standing rules allow us to enter into discussion new business. And so this overture that we introduced was 2 weeks in advance. It was a part of the docket as new business. It was there for everybody to see. And we get to the meeting, and men argue against the overture, allowing the overture to be discussed. Now, these ruling elders came to vote on this overture. They argued against allowing the ruling elder to be the overture to be discussed because it wasn't within the 21 days. Yet, a whole slew of other new business that came in after the overture was given to everybody weeks in advance, was allowed in. And so these ruling elders, like, I don't even know why I come, and it's like nothing was done out of procedure. It was all within the procedure, but it was a procedural move to block an overture that they just didn't even want to discuss, rather than let it come to a vote, And I think ruling elders, I see them get frustrated over, like you said, things that seem to be predetermined before they got to the meeting. Like they're not in the discussion.
And they may not be. It just seems that way. And
Yes.
all the pastors know each other, and many of them know the rules. So everyone but the ruling elder understands what's going on. And so, yeah, I get that. I mean, my first General Assembly was just a whirlwind. I had no idea what was going on. And even since then, I think the last couple, I figured it all out, but nothing really took me by surprise. But it just comes quick, and you can think, oh, we're going to talk about this, and you turn your head, and we've moved on. It's quick
Right.
vote, no debate, gone.
That's it. You're explaining exactly what I was. So Brad, as we're getting close to where I like to be on this, what are the similarities? Because our people that disagree with us, whenever we bring Christianity and liberalism up, they're quick to say it's disingenuous to bring up the fundamentalist modernist controversy because we're not dealing with inerrancy of Scripture in the PCA. Nobody's denying the deity of Christ or the miracles, and so this is. They almost claim it's a dishonest thing to be bringing up. What are the similarities, and why is it a serious thing what we're going through now, and how can we learn from that event?
Well, I think something important to say, or a good. So, after this book came out in 23, and then I think the Shall the Fundamentalists Win and the Auburn Affirmation, which was the big liberal manifesto, came out in 24 or 25. So very quickly, the battle lines were drawn. Machen was obviously one of the main leaders, though he was fairly young and a junior kind of professor at that point. But very quickly, he became a focal point. He was nominated at some point in the mid to late 20s for a higher professorial post, a chair of apologetics, I think, and he was blocked. The assembly voted him down. That just never happened. And he was kind of the mascot for the bad guys. And pretty soon they had a plan to reorganize Princeton Seminary, which was going to expand the board or make the board. And there was a board of directors and board of trustees. And one was more conservative and one was more liberal. And they added, they kind of packed the court and then they put them together. And they marginalized the conservatives, and Machen suffered in that. But it wasn't the liberals who did Machen in, who torpedoed him. It was evangelicals. It was the moderates. It was Erdman. You hear me do the "Don't be an Erdman." Well, it was Charles Erdman. It was Robert Speer. It was Stevenson. I don't remember his first name. But it was the moderate evangelicals of their day who were more, they were more Christian American, they were more evangelical, they were more ecumenical, they were more revivalist in a way. I mean, some of them were actually kind of revival speakers than they were Presbyterian. They were more committed to church growth, a certain kind of outreach and cultural, impact than they were to Presbyterian distinctives. And we see that today. I mean, that's just, I tell people the battle in the PCA is not liberals versus conservatives. It's Presbyterians versus evangelicals. I'm convinced of that. And that's exactly, it's not the same issues and it's not the same magnitude of problem. I would never, ever say that. But the moderates, the evangelicals of Machen's day sided with the liberals because that was the big tent. That was the direction it was going. That was the zeitgeist. The nice people and the nice people got together, and they marginalized the bad people. And Machen was the bad guy. He was the old-fashioned stick in the mud. He was the impediment to progress. He was yesterday's news. He he represented an era they wanted to move on from. Old Princeton was known for orthodoxy, careful scholarship, the confession, the languages. There was kind of a student revolt in the first decade of the 20th century. While Machen, I think, was maybe an instructor, maybe a senior. But the students kind of revolted, and they said, we want more practical courses. We want less doctrine. We want less languages. We want practical theology. We want cultural apologetics. Does any of that sound familiar to you?
Yes.
Our denominational seminary, now they've undone this. This is going away. They renamed their systematic theology department the missional theology department. I mean, that's exactly the same impulse. So I think I recognize that in the PCA. There are Presbyterians and there are Presbyterians. There are evangelicals and there are confessional Presbyterians. And I think evangelicals become liberals. I mean, look at it. Evangelicalism, generally, it moves left, it breaks broad. And, look at the deconstructors. Look at the emergent church. Where'd they come out of? They came out of evangelicalism. All this deconstruction, all this new social gospel, with the progressive Christianity that we talk about, it's coming out of the evangelicals, not the confessionalists. So I think, that's the firewall. The confessionalists are always going to be fighting in a denomination or a tradition that, we've got our new school and our old school. We've always had people who were more broad versus more doctrinally precise. You're always going to have that struggle. The new school, old school controversy, the liberal fundamentalist controversy. These things keep replaying. We're not in a cycle where we're about to lose the gospel and the Bible, but I think some of the same dynamics are there.
Yes, definitely. And what I was highlighting in the last episode was a lot of the arguments, a lot of the motives, a lot of the tactics being used to against confessionalists are the same. Like if you read Fosdick's sermon, you can't not see. Just take the specific issues out, like Brad and I are saying. Take those out, but you can't not see what's going on today. I was telling Brad before we started this, it's almost as if they're tweeting quotes from Fosdick's sermon against us.
I think I did a few of those. I tweeted some lines from Shall the Fundamentalists Win, and see if anyone could figure out who that was. Of course, with Google, everybody can figure out very quickly. But I noticed exactly the same thing. It's the appeal to keeping the young people, reaching the urban professional, reaching the intellectual, changing the culture. And again, the Christian nationalists of then, really were the mainline Protestants. They were the liberals. Their goal was as much about dealing with immigrant culture. Machen was a huge advocate for immigrants and for people that didn't speak English, and for private religious schools, and for German-speaking Lutheran schools. And he was even for Catholic immigrants. He thought, leave them alone. Let they've got their culture. Let them do their thing. But it was the Rockefellers, the Woodrow Wilsons, who really wanted to make this, homogenous, WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture. They ran things, and they wanted to keep running things, and religion was part of it. Was part of the tool to run the country, and in Woodrow Wilson's case, to save the world with the League of Nations and World War I and all those things.
Right. Yeah. I do think one thing you said is going to be hard for some people to grasp. I know what you're saying because it's really a confessional theology and a polity thing, but there are a lot of evangelicals that are not what we would say like broadly evangelical, that are super conservative, that aren't Presbyterian, and I think they're still allies. I think they're operating on a system and a foundation that could lead them that way. But I don't
certainly.
think too.
Yeah, certainly there are plenty of conservatives, but if you're not confessionalist, if you don't have those guardrails and you're not accountable, anything can happen, and we've seen it. One of the things, we talk about Charles Finney, who began as some Presbyterian, the Northern Church, New School, I guess, ordained him very inadvisedly. He didn't believe Presbyterian doctrine, but a bad Presbyterian made him a Presbyterian minister for a while. Of course, he left that. But Charles Finney, the revivalist, Mr. New Measures, he's the father of the revivalist right and the activist left in this country. Toward the end of Finney's life, when he saw that his converts, many of them weren't real, he thought, well, I should have emphasized the law more. And he became a very legalistic, almost a perfectionist, and he got all into social issues. And, he founded Oberlin, or he was president of Oberlin University, which is easily the most liberal university in the United States of America. It's just, there are a couple of these schools, Oberlin and Swarthmore, but one of them is called the Kremlin on the Crump, because the Crump River runs next to one of them. I can't remember which. But so Finney, the revivalist, he's got ancestors who are the wild fundamentalist, screaming fundamentalist preachers that we might hear. But he's also the father, in many ways, of the rainbow stole wearing, gay Pastor Megan, they them of the mainline. So revivalism can lead you astray very quickly if it's about experience, if it's about human action more than God's sovereign action in salvation.
Yeah. So I have Fosdick's sermon open, and right at the end he says, the second element which is needed if we are to reach a happy solution of this problem is a clear insight into the main issues of modern Christianity. All right, ignore that. And a sense of penitent shame that the Christian church should be quarreling over little matters when the world is dying of great needs. And then it goes on. It says, the present world situation smells to heaven now, and now in the presence of colossal problems which must be solved in Christ's name. And for Christ's sake, the fundamentalists propose to drive out from the Christian churches all the consecrated souls who do not agree with their theory of inspiration. What immeasurable folly. And so you see how doctrine and theology and what we believe is minimized because of the problems in the world. And what we really need to be focused on is again, the big tent idea. We're all trying to work toward the same thing, even if we believe different things. And of course, that's not true. But you know how Fosdick started this sermon was this morning we are to think of the fundamentalist controversy which threatens to divide the American churches. So we see this now. It's those holding to sound doctrine, to confessionalism. We're the divisive ones, not the ones that are departing from what we believe and what we've agreed to. And so, again, just the common theme through these two things is again, those similar sort of tactics that are used. Like, we've become the divisive ones for demanding that we do what we've agreed to do, believe what we've agreed to believe. And when you said, we're not dealing with the same problems, we've said that repeatedly. I do think, and I've said this before, that liberalism, I believe, is basically an honest position. They don't believe the Bible, and they say that. We don't believe this literally. And so that's why Machen says it's a different religion, and I agree with him. What I think is in the progressivism that we see today, so we're not dealing with liberalism, which is denying the inerrancy of Scripture, the deity of Christ, all that. We're dealing with this progressivism, which reshapes, reframes, redefines words, which enables them to claim to hold to inerrancy, but then say things like sufficiency of Scripture is not enough. We need these other things, social sciences or whatever, to the progressive. I say it's the perspicuity of Scripture. Scripture's not really clear on these things, and that's why we have, a more egalitarian bent. I listened to the recent Presbycast you had where it was going through Keller's, I don't know, I call it Keller's manifesto, whatever that document is for his way forward in Christianity in Western civilization. And, he basically, like you highlighted it. Yeah, we got to move toward egalitarianism in his mind, and that all comes from this view that the Scriptures just aren't clear on this. And so I think progressivism and postmodernism, while they're not liberalism and modernism, they are maybe even more cancerous to the church because they're deceptive in what they're doing. At least in liberalism, guys came forward and said, we don't believe Christ was born of a virgin. The presbytery just shouldn't have ordained them, but they were honest about that position. What we have now is people affirming doctrines, but believing different things about the doctrines, but saying we believe in the inerrancy in those cases. We're just misunderstanding what's inerrant about it. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. But there was equivocation among the Protestant liberals. Many of them would, they would hide behind words, and they would say things that sounded good, and so there was equivocation. But it was, it was pretty clear what everyone believed. But I think also something that one of the things you can say about Machen was he was a spirituality of the church guy. So he thought the mission of the church was spiritual. It was not to necessarily, yes, the world needs to change and Christians can change it, but it wasn't the job of the Northern Presbyterian Church to do social engineering and have, as Keller suggested, this national organization of Christians to address social problems, with denominational involvement. So, but Machen was about the spirituality of the church. So is our confession, by the way. There's basically a chapter on that. So that's got to do with the mission of the church. Is our mission everything, or is it a very narrow thing? Is it a change the city or the country thing as an activity of the institutional church, or is it about making disciples and believers and letting them do it? So the mission of the church is a huge thing. And I'll just say this: I look at a lot of church websites, and most, the trendy thing is you have a sentence or a sentence fragment or a slogan that tells what your priorities are and what the church is about. And a lot of times these days it's love. We're going to love the city into life. Right. I can't relate to that at all. That is a different. Now, I think behind it, I think they're almost being dishonest because they believe better than that. That's a different religion. Religion is what we do in the service of God, right? That's what we do when we get together. That's religion. That's a different religion. And it's not good news. You're a single mother in the city and your husband's left you and you got 2 kids and you were raised in the church and, You've been reading your Bible, and somebody gave you a R.C. Sproul book, and you think, okay, this is something to this, and you go to this PCA church, and you get there, and they say, good news, we're glad you're here. We're going to redeem the city. We're going to transform this. You just walked past these burned out buildings, and you hear the police sirens. Well, that's part of your job. You're going to do that. No, you're here. It's like the last chapter, the last paragraphs of Christianity and Liberalism. I know we're running out of time. This is a good time. So this is a parallel. This is a parallel between then and now. I usually can't read the last few pages of this book without breaking down a little bit. But let me read to the end of the book, and hopefully it would whet someone's desire to read the whole thing. Okay, so Machen says, next to last page, we'll stop and talk about, we'll comment a little bit. He says, one hears much, it is true, about Christian union and harmony and cooperation, but the union that is meant is often a union with the world against the Lord, so a worldly church, or at best, a forced union of machinery, meaning organizational machinery, and tyrannical committees. How different is the true unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace? Sometimes it is true, the longing for Christian fellowship is satisfied. There are congregations, even in the present age of conflict, that are really gathered around the table of the crucified Lord. There are pastors that are pastors indeed, but such congregations in many cities are difficult to find. Weary with the conflicts of the world, one goes into church to seek refreshment for the soul. And what does one find? Alas, too often, one finds only the turmoil of the world. Social issues, social conflict, racial conflict, all those things. They were doing the same thing then. And then he continues. The preacher comes forward not out of a secret place of meditation and power, not with the authority of God's word permeating his message, not with human wisdom pushed far into the background by the glory of the cross, but he comes with human opinions about the social problems of the hour, or easy solutions of the vast problem of sin. Such is the sermon. So he's saying, you go into these churches, that's what you might hear. Well, we're not that bad, but there are elements of that, right? I mean, we know there are. We've heard the sermons, we've seen the statements. And then he continues. And this takes a little understanding, this part. And then perhaps the service is closed by one of those hymns breathing out the angry passions of 1861. He's talking about the battle hymn of the Republic. He's talking about Christian nationalism, real Christian nationalism that was rampant in his day. So he's talking about bringing in we're refighting the Civil War right here in this worship service. So these hymns found in the back part of the hymnals, he says, thus the warfare of the world has entered into the house of God, and sad indeed is the heart of the man who has come seeking peace. And now we come to the last paragraph. And he asks this question, is there no refuge from strife? Is there no place of refreshing where a man can prepare for the battle of life? Is there no place where 2 or 3 can gather in Jesus' name to forget for the moment all those things that divide nation from nation and race from race, to forget human pride, to forget the passions of war, to forget the puzzling problems of industrial strife? He's referring to labor, Marxism in the cities, in the industries. That was all over the newspapers then. And to unite in overflowing gratitude at the foot of the cross. If there be such a place, then that is the house of God, and that the gate of heaven. And from under the threshold of that house will go forth a river that will revive the weary world. The end. That's how he ends the chapter on the church. And I think it's just that chapter and right down to every issue is incredibly relevant, much more relevant today than when I first read it in probably 2004 or 5. I mean, we hadn't had the injection into the life of the PCA, a lot of these social issues and political issues that we've seen since. The last 10 years,
Right.
We've got all those things, all of them.
Yeah, definitely. Like Harry Reeder says, like whack-a-mole Christianity. And I think what you just read should resonate with everybody listening to anybody that has an interest to listen to this podcast should say, man, is he writing about today? And I think what it really highlights is, and this goes back to your point about the spirituality of the church, is the priorities of the church. And the liberals and the fundamentalists of the day had different priorities and over important things. And I think that's what we're seeing today. Again, the fact that nobody is denying the key doctrines of the faith or the inerrancy of Scripture is not in question in the PCA, but what is the priorities of the churches, of, like you just said, the websites? What are they reflecting? I mean, that is telling. And so I think that is a good place to end. So my encouragement to everybody is to read this book. It's only, like Brad said, 130 pages or whatever.
180, 80.
Oh, 180? Okay. Yeah.
There are all sorts of special editions with some commentaries. Westminster Seminary's done them. Ligonier's got one with Stephen Nichols, providing notes. I think he did a biography of Machen. We should say you should read the Stonehouse biography of Machen. It's the long one. He was a student. It's on Audible as well. You should read Defending the Faith by Darrell Hart, which absolutely changed my world in about 2005 when I read that. And Stephen Nichols has a biography. There are 2 or 3 lesser ones, but read those. Yeah, and you can, and as Brad said earlier, you can get this for free. I mean, my version I've had for over 10 years free on Amazon, on Kindle, on my Kindle. So I don't have actually page numbers to know as I'm looking at it. But yeah, definitely get those. Also, I guess I'll say about the Reformed. Let me see what it is. Reformed Media podcast. Darrell Hart did a whole class on Reformed Forum podcasts. You can, because of the 100-year anniversary, I don't know, there might be 10 episodes or something. I think it was Darrell Hart. Would you know, Brad? Yeah, and he's done a similar series on Presbycast. And you go back years in Reformed Forum archives. He's done a Sunday school class on that before. So there are lots of versions of that, similar material, all good. You can also subscribe to the podcast called Theology Simply Profound, which is a sub-podcast of Reformed Forum, and they have a full reading in 7, there's 7 chapters in the book. You can listen to the whole book with a little bit of commentary. My friends Bob Tarullo and Rob McKenzie. But Theology Simply Profound, that's very good. Download those. And my friend Tim Hopper, go to readmachen.com, and he's got all sorts of resources there, bibliography, timeline of his life. Readmachen.com and Theology Simply Profound are some lesser-known resources that would be tremendous for anyone. So I told you Brad was a Machen-o-phile. I'm going to patent that word. And he is. So this is Brad Isbell again from Presbycast. So definitely, if you don't know about Presbycast, I don't know how you would know about me if you didn't know about Presbycast. So you know them first, but check them out for sure. And Brad, I appreciate it. You're usually the guy asking the questions or leading the discussion, so I appreciate you coming on here and giving us an education. Well, usually I just rant to my wife, so I can rant to you now. Perfect. Yeah. All right.
Well, I guess that's the Presbyterian Reformed Churchman signing off. Again, if this interests you, or if you have other ruling elder friends, be sure to share this. Also, go and like it, follow it, do whatever you do on the channel wherever you're listening to this, because it'll help others get the word out. Thanks again, Brad.